Welcome to Now Serving a Site of Therapy, a client's introductory guide into the therapeutic world. Be sure to follow, subscribe, and comment on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. To schedule a therapy appointment, call us at 650-223-5065. For more information on this and other related topics, check out our blog at isotherapy.com, where you can also contact us through our website. I'm your host, Dalton Huckabee, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm grateful you joined me. Welcome to this week's episode of Now Serving a Site of Therapy, a client's introductory guide into the therapeutic world. This week, we are joined by Elliana Woolnesty, who is an associate marriage and family therapist and CORA's LGBTQ plus clinical coordinator. They received their master's degree in counseling psychology with a concentration in drama therapy from the California Institute of Integral Studies in 2022. And they've been treating clients at CORA since 2021. Elliana is passionate about the intersections of relationship abuse, social justice, and creative pathways to healing. Welcome, Elliana, to this week's episode of the podcast.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's so great to meet you. As we were just talking about, right? Sounds like we have each referred clients to our respective employers, right, for services. And so it's always great to have like a full circle and like see a friendly face, like representing CORA. So really glad that you're able to join us today.
Yeah, it's super sweet. I'm glad to be here.
And so for those who may not be familiar with CORA, can you just give a brief explanation about what CORA is and who they are and what population they best serve?
Absolutely. So CORA, first of all, it's an acronym. It stands for Community Overcoming Relationship Abuse. And it is San Mateo County's Intimate Partner Violence Resource Center. So we support survivors of intimate partner violence, sometimes known as domestic violence, sometimes known as relationship abuse, all across San Mateo County. And a fun fact is that most counties in California, if not the entire US, is going to have a dedicated domestic violence resource center. And so if you're outside of San Mateo County, there's likely one in your county. So you can always look it up. So we're here in San Mateo.
Good to know, right? Definitely need those resources, right?
Yeah.
For people who may, sometimes things happen and we need to be able to like access those appropriate resources. And so knowing that those are available in our area is great to know. And so you mentioned like domestic violence can also be referred to as like intimate partner violence, right? Relationship abuse, like different ways of phrasing it. And whenever we're talking about something, we like to define it. And we can get into myths a little bit later, but one of the things I was thinking about, like when we define, well, what is domestic violence, like it doesn't always necessarily have to involve physical abuse, correct?
Yeah, not at all. There's so many different forms of abuse, and many, abusive relationships might not even include physical aspects of it at all.
Yeah. So then how would you define intimate partner violence or domestic abuse? How would you define that?
Yeah. Well, first I'll say that those terms, intimate partner violence, domestic violence, relationship abuse, are all pretty much interchangeable. So first of all, for anyone listening that might not be aware of that. And then in terms of the definition, there are many definitions for abuse or relationship abuse. One might find the legal definition. So in terms of our legal services, they'll use the legal definition. But in terms of every other service at CORA and most places serving survivors, especially at CORA, we use the definition provided by the Violence Against Women's Act, which is a federal act that provides funding to domestic violence organizations within the nation. And it does have a specific definition. It's sometimes called the social definition. And so that is a pattern of behaviors used by one partner to gain and maintain power and control over another partner in an intimate relationship. And I'll, if it's okay to go into that a little further.
Yeah, please do. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
whenever I share that, I love sharing that definition with clients and with everyone because it actually can be so empowering to know our definitions. It's almost like knowing your rights, as no one can take that away from you once you have the education of it.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
and it's kind of a lengthy definition. There's lots of parts to it. And so I like to break it down by the specific parts, like the first part being it's a pattern of behaviors. And then the other part of it being that those pattern of behaviors are used to gain and maintain power and control over another person. So when we think about is something abusive or not, we need both of those aspects. Is it a pattern? And is the intent of that those behaviors to control another person in an intimate relationship?
Yeah, and I could even see how that would be easy to be able to recognize that that's what's happening at when it's happening, which
Yeah, it can certainly be
might
more
be part
helpful.
of what kind of I don't know if that would be kind of like a barrier to someone trying to seek support earlier on, right?
Yeah.
Because they may not like recognize it as it's happening.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Yeah, it is really hard to recognize while it's happening. It's like that metaphor of the frog in boiling water where sometimes you don't know what's happening until the water's boiling. And then, oh my gosh, how do you get out of it? That's really difficult. And abuse is really similar, where it's not usually like an all at once thing. It's a slow build into, or sometimes a rapid build, but there's a build into more abusive patterns of behaviors. And knowing that definition can maybe help bring some clarity. And there's, still it's really hard to recognize sometimes about what is abusive, what's not abusive in terms of those behaviors.
Yeah, yeah. And so, like you said, having that information might be able to, I don't know, maybe help us recognize earlier on. So, what would you say? Do you have some examples of like what those patterns of behaviors might be for someone who might be listening and like, okay, well, how do I know? Like, what should I be looking out for? Like, do you have a few
Yeah.
examples? Like, especially if it's not physical abuse, right? If it's of some other like underlying means of like our attempts to control, pardon me, to control and manipulate.
Mhm.
What are some of those patterns of behaviors that we could look out for?
So there are many signs that could be warning signs of abuse. Um, they aren't necessarily inherently abusive within and of themselves. We again want to see what's the pattern, see what the intent is. But these are some like orange or maybe red flags to look out for. Um, Something I see so common is really quick involvement or this feeling of being kind of swept off one's feet. When we think about domestic violence, we also want to think about the cycle of violence. So, in every relationship, there is a honeymoon phase aspect of it. Even within healthy relationships, you first get to know
Sure.
someone, and right, and it's really like exciting, and it's such a juicy part of the relationship, and
But then
but
we
every
also have those masking tendencies. We're only showing the best side of
totally.
ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah. And that happens to everyone across the board. What we want to look out for when it is, still healthy, and when it veers off into not being so healthy is that part in relationships where things start to get kind of more real. It's real life and less of the honeymoon. Um, Different behaviors like that can escalate things like arguments, like jealousy might be a little bit of a red flag. And not just having jealousy, but also what do they do about those feelings of jealousy?
Like,
Does it
right, right.
yeah, does it become more controlling? Do they start, asking questions about, what you do with your day or who you spend time with, or maybe start asking you to stop spending time with people, kind of isolating you from your relationships might be a little bit of a red flag. Certainly any feeling like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, like anything that feels a little bit of, you know, two different sides of them. Maybe they're one side with you and one side with other people in their life outside in the world. And so not being kind of even throughout the relationship and across multiple relationships in their lives. Um, Blaming is also a big aspect of abusive relationships, and can show up in little ways. Blaming other people for maybe one's own reactions or behaviors or feelings and not taking ownership or accountability for their own actions, feelings, and behaviors. And again, that kind of pairing with other behaviors like the jealousy and the controlling, and those start to build up kind of
Yeah,
a
like you
case
said,
where
it
this
could be
isn't
that
so
slow
healthy.
build. Uh-huh.
Yeah. one other thing I want to add too is like a constant boundary pushing. So any behavior that doesn't respect someone else's boundaries, it could be little, like I don't want to um, engage in this kind of sexual act right now, or I don't want to talk about this right now. Can we talk about it tomorrow? Whatever kind of boundaries, if they're not respected or they're pushed or there's a sense of blaming or guilt that comes up when they're trying to push a boundary, that is kind of a red flag too.
And I can almost kind of see, like, as you were talking, what I was imagining is if we have like our own friends, right? Like I often think about, when I think about relationships, I think it's important, like, for people to have their own social supports systems,
Totally.
right? And so, like, if someone is talking with their friends about, their relationship, the friends might be able to see the natural unfolding and might be able to pinpoint out some things earlier on
Mhm.
that we may not be able to see ourselves because we're too close in it, right? But
Yeah.
even then, that when you talk about like the trying to control, I would imagine that one of those might be, hey, like they try to drive a wedge between the other person and their friends,
Hmm.
right? So that they don't get called out for what's going on. You know what I mean? Just to try to, like,
Hmm.
control that other person.
Yeah, exactly. That happens all the time. Friends, family, coworkers, any kind of person that might be a threat to one's power and control over another person is going to be difficult for that person with more abusive tendencies to be okay with having around sometimes.
What are some myths about domestic abuse that you've worked with clients around?
Yeah.
Some things that come to mind for me. I mean, if I'm to be a bit vulnerable here, right? Like, I grew up around domestic abuse, and so sometimes even people fighting, I don't know, just, there's trauma has an impact on the central nervous system, right?
Hmm.
And so sometimes, even still, if I see people arguing, I'm just like, I can't with that, right? It just hits too close to home.
Yeah.
And so I remember even my stepmom at the time when I was younger, right? Like, having her go through her own process of, well, why can't she just leave?
Hmm. Hmm.
Right. And
Yeah.
so, and I remember that's just one that really stuck out for me. And so
Yeah.
I was a bit curious, when we try to expel myths around domestic abuse, how does that look when you're working with clients around this?
Yeah. I mean, such a good question, especially how different it is from being on an outside perspective, witnessing abuse happen to someone else versus being in the abusive relationship oneself, and how different those perspectives are. Um, when we talk about myths with clients, sometimes we refer to them as like uh, reasons to leave, or even like reasons to stay, like barriers to leaving or reasons to stay in a relationship, which I think kind of contribute to what are these myths. Like, why don't you just leave? That's a huge myth that comes up with clients all the time. Or sometimes clients have the thought that it's not bad enough, it's not actually abuse, they're not physically harming me, and
Yeah.
so it doesn't count as abuse, no one's going to believe me. No one believing them is a huge thing too, because so much of abuse can be psychological and emotional, and they don't necessarily have physical evidence for that all the time. And so it can be harder in terms of getting a restraining order, can be more difficult if you don't have any kind of physical evidence. Even like getting a divorce, or when it comes, if you have kids, it can be really difficult to separate your life when you have children together. And um,
Absolutely.
yeah, and we think about like the different aspects that are barriers that even keep people trapped in relationships too. It's like that emotional aspect. Will anyone ever love me again? Am I worthy of this? Maybe I deserve the abuse. Could be myths. I think about finances and how much financial control can be a huge impact of the abuse, and especially I'm in the Bay Area and San Mateo is in the Bay Area. How how it's so expensive, and
So expensive. Yeah,
housing everywhere
everywhere.
is really
Yeah.
difficult, and surviving, the cost of living is so high. It can be, sometimes it's the smarter financial decision to stay with an abusive partner, and that is going to be really difficult to understand on the outside too. um yeah, those are the myths that come to mind right now.
I just can't help but think, like, as we're talking about some of these barriers to leaving or reasons to stay, right? How how challenging it can be to I recognize it earlier on,
Yeah.
that by the time you do recognize and decide to take some action,
Hmm.
that the impact that that must have
Hmm.
on people mental health.
Yeah.
And so, and the state that they might be in when they do finally reach to that place of reaching out for support.
Hmm.
And so that's what's got me a little bit curious. Like, yeah, I don't know. Does that make sense?
I think it does. Yeah, what's coming up for me is that there are kind of two aspects of what people need when they start realizing they're in an abusive relationship and want to seek support. There's the material aspect of things, and there's the emotional aspect of things. So, materialistically, some of the needs that come in to us are, um, I need to physically leave, but I don't have anywhere to go, and I don't have anyone to stay with, or maybe it's not safe to leave, or how do I even physically leave this environment? So that's one part.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
and then when they do, how the financial aspect is so huge. How do I even afford a place on my own? How do I afford moving out? How do I maybe we see all the time, not being having had a job for a long time can be a part of it. Like part of the abuse is making a partner stop working their job and either take up childcare full time or doing something else, or maybe working for them, and suddenly you don't have a job and you haven't had a job for 10 years. How do you go back into the workplace is really hard.
Exactly.
Yeah, or even like clothing, leaving everything behind. Like there's so many material aspects of that. Or like if you leave and you have pets, can you bring the pets to where you're gonna go? It's like it
There's
gets
so
really
many
complicated.
things. Yeah,
So many things.
yeah.
Every situation is so unique. So that first part is like, how do we materialistically support clients and plan for their physical safety? And then once we kind of have some things in place, how do we move to the emotional aspects? What are the emotional impacts of leaving? Like whether that is, well, grief is so huge. Grief
So
actually is,
huge. Yeah.
yeah, because there's so much loss. There's loss of a relationship, loss of a life that someone once knew or thought that they had,
Their
loss of
dreams, right?
dreams,
Yeah.
time, their autonomy. Like grief is such a huge part, which even when I started working at CORA, that was kind of surprising. Of wow, I didn't realize so much of the work I'd be doing would be about grief. But
This is so grief.
yeah,
Yeah. So it can come up in so many different ways.
it totally
It
does.
really can. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So grief, and then also, yeah, also grief of identity, like losing one's sense of self, is so huge. And I think too about trust, self-trust. When you say no to yourself for a long time, um, getting out of a pattern of self-betrayal in order to accommodate someone else's needs can be really difficult. And so that's another thing I see come up with a lot of clients too, is how to rebuild their trust with themselves, how to rebuild their ability to listen to themselves and to their gut and to trust the choices that they make is really huge.
That's so
Yeah.
empowering. Yeah. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
love that, right? Kind of like going into more of like the strengths-based approach, right? Right. Where we can, like,
Yes.
yes, we can acknowledge all of these things. And yet at the same time, there lives within each of us the
Hmm.
ability, right, to tap into some resources, or
Hmm.
being able to find ways that, like, rely on our own skills, our own intuition, like you said,
Yeah.
right? That's been squashed down for so long, or
Hmm.
however long, right?
Hmm.
And so that's been squashed down. And so learning how to tap back into that again, to
Yeah.
strive towards this more deserving life that we all, you know,
Hmm.
strive for, right? To be happy, and be in if they choose to be in a a different relationship after that, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I One thing I'll say is that at least at CORA, that's all I can speak to in terms of the domestic violence world, but I imagine it's maybe similar other places. But we don't ever tell clients what to do. Like, we are not going to tell clients to leave their partner unless a situation is really extreme and we're really concerned for their physical safety. We might more gently confront, hey, this is very concerning and we want to get you the support. And at the end of the day, people need to be able to make their own decisions. And
Absolutely.
the
Yep.
goal is always to empower a client to make the decision that's right for them. I don't know what's right for my clients. I might have like an idea in mind about what I would hope for them, things that I've seen work for others, but every situation's so unique, everyone's needs are so unique. People are so resilient, and they know when it's right, when it's not right, and need the trust to be able to figure it out and have the support to be empowered to make whatever decision it is that is right to them. So we have clients who come in that are still in their relationships that never leave their relationships, or we have clients who have been out of their relationship for a long time, or we have clients who leave the relationships while they're with us. Our role, at least in CORA's mental health department, is not to tell people what to do. It's just to
Right.
make
It's to
sure they
meet them where they're at,
meet
right?
them where they're at and
Yeah.
empower them. Give them the information they might need. Give them resources that could be supportive. Be with them on their journey of what it is they decide to do, but to empower them to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that idea of, like you said, everyone, they're the, I always forget they're, they're the creator of their own lives, right?
Yeah.
And so honoring
The expert of their own
the
experience.
expert.
Yes.
Thank you.
I knew
That
what you
makes
were saying,
sense.
and I was trying to remember too. And yeah,
Yeah, they're the
they
expert of their
are.
own lives, right? But
Yeah.
sometimes, just like any of us, we might get a little sidetracked, right? So we need help just kind of getting back on the road, and some of that might be, like you say, kind of like tapping into what are some of these resources I can use, or what are some of these strengths that I have, that I possess. Be sure to tune in next week as we continue our discussion with Elliana at CORA to discuss resources and services, LGBT services, strengths, choice, and resilience, and psychoeducation around intimate partner violence. Thanks for tuning in this week. Be sure to listen to our next episode as we explore various aspects of how to show up for ourselves and others by tending to our own mental and emotional well-being.